John D. Rockefeller wasn't supposed to be there. It was a sweltering day in Cleveland when the local refinery owners filed into the room. They thought they were attending a friendly meeting about coordination, maybe a new partnership. What they got instead was a trap. Rockefeller, the soft-spoken Baptist with a gaze like iron, had secretly struck a deal with the railroads, guaranteeing him cheaper shipping rates if he could crush his competition. The other men had no idea. One by one, he offered to buy out their companies, politely, firmly, and when some resisted, he'd drop his voice and calmly remind them, "You either sell or I'll ruin you." Most sold. The ones who didn't, their shipments mysteriously got delayed, their rates doubled, their pipelines accidentally clogged. Within months, Rockefeller Standard Oil had swallowed nearly every competitor in Cleveland, and that was just the beginning, because what came next would change the rules of capitalism forever. From the outside, John D. Rockefeller looked like any pious church-going family man. He dressed plainly, avoided scandal, and tithed 10% of his income before he even paid his own bills. But behind the choir robes was a man obsessed with control. At just 16, he got his first job as an assistant bookkeeper. While other boys chased girls, John chased ledgers. He tracked every penny he earned in a little black notebook for the rest of his life. His big break came in the oil rush of the 1860s. At the time, Pennsylvania was bursting with wells. Oil was dirty, unstable, and smelly, but it was also powerful. And while most wildcatters were scrambling to drill, Rockefeller focused on something much sneakier, refining. He figured, let them dig. I'll be the one to clean it up and sell it. His refineries were cleaner, more efficient, and wildly profitable. But that wasn't enough. He wanted all of it, and to do that, he created one of the most brutal tactics in corporate history. They called it the Cleveland Massacre. But the massacre was just Rockefeller's first move, because the real power play, that came when he took his war national. Standard Oil didn't just dominate because it refined oil better. It dominated because Rockefeller figured out a way to hack the entire transportation system. In 1871, he quietly made a secret agreement with the country's biggest railroad companies, offering them huge volumes of business in exchange for rebates on shipping. That meant while his competitors paid full price to move their oil, Rockefeller paid less, sometimes half as much. Worse, the deal also gave him kickbacks. The railroads paid him every time they shipped a rival's oil. You heard that right. The more his enemies sold, the more he made. This network of shadow deals was known as the South Improvement Company, and when word got out, the oil towns erupted. Refiners called it highway robbery. Protests broke out in Pennsylvania. Local papers roasted Rockefeller as the most hated man in America. Under pressure, the deal collapsed, but by then, it didn't matter, because Standard Oil had already tightened its grip, and Rockefeller now had eyes on every step of the oil chain: drilling, refining, transportation, marketing, even the barrels themselves. But the public outcry from the South Improvement scandal would do something else too. It planted a seed in one person's mind, someone who would become his biggest nightmare. Ida Tarbell wasn't a business tycoon. She wasn't even a trained investigator. She was just a journalist whose father had been run out of the oil business by Rockefeller. Her mission? Tell the story no one else dared to tell. She spent years digging through court records, interviewing former employees, and compiling a trail of shady tactics and backroom deals that shocked the nation. In 1902, her expose titled "The History of the Standard Oil Company" began running in McClure's magazine. Her writing was vivid, plain-spoken, and devastating. She described how Rockefeller used spies to infiltrate rival companies, how he paid off politicians to look the other way, and how he blackmailed entire industries into cooperating with him. But it wasn't just the facts that hurt. It was the tone. She painted Rockefeller Rockefeller not as a genius, but as a manipulator, a man who wore the mask of humility while quietly crushing his enemies. The series became a national sensation, and while Rockefeller never publicly responded, behind closed doors, he was furious. He called her that poisonous woman. His PR team tried to discredit her, but it was too late, because now the whole country wanted answers, and that pressure, it would soon reach the highest court in the land. By the early 1900s, Standard Oil was everywhere. It owned 90% of U.S. oil refining and distribution, gas stations, pipelines, tank cars, barges, you name it. Rockefeller had it, but that level of control didn't go unnoticed. In 1906, President Theodore Roosevelt's administration filed a lawsuit under the Sherman Antitrust Act, arguing that Standard Oil's business practices were a threat to fair competition. The case dragged on for 5 years, with Rockefeller's lawyers insisting that he had simply outcompeted everyone fairly. The court didn't buy it. In 1911, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that Standard Oil was an illegal monopoly and ordered the company to be broken into 34 separate companies. Overnight, Rockefeller's empire shattered. But here's the twist. Rockefeller owned stock in all the new companies, and when each one began trading publicly, their combined value soared. In fact, the breakup doubled his personal wealth. He went from being the richest man in America to the richest man in the world. And yet, despite all the backlash, despite the lawsuits and exposés, Rockefeller remained mostly silent, because for him, the real game wasn't fame, it was legacy. By the time he retired, Rockefeller had already donated hundreds of millions to causes like education, medicine, and public health. He funded universities, disease eradication programs, and what would later become the University of Chicago. But critics weren't fooled. Many saw his philanthropy as a calculated effort to polish a reputation forged in ruthlessness. Still, it worked. Rockefeller lived to see himself celebrated as a benefactor. Portraits softened his gaze. Biographies glossed over the oil wars. Textbooks told kids he was a captain of industry, and the companies that sprang from Standard Oil, they're still around. ExxonMobil, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, all billion-dollar giants that were once pieces of the Standard Oil puzzle. But here's the kicker. Standard Oil never truly died. It just changed its name. In fact, one of its descendants even returned to the Standard branding in select markets, operating gas stations under nostalgic throwback names. Others embedded themselves in global energy and petrochemical empires, hiding in plain sight. And now, with the green energy race heating up, some of them are quietly buying up clean tech startups, carbon capture patents, and biofuel producers, preparing for yet another reinvention, just like Rockefeller might have done. Dozens of baby companies. Most would have walked away with their winnings and vanished into a quiet retirement. Rockefeller didn't. Instead, he began embedding his wealth deeper into American society itself. He poured money into universities, foundations, and research labs. The Rockefeller Foundation, started in 1913, funneled millions into everything from medical schools to economic policy research. On the surface, it was all goodwill, but behind the scenes, something else was happening. By funding schools, Rockefeller helped shape how capitalism, business, and even history were taught. His money flowed into the University of Chicago, Harvard, and dozens of other institutions, places that would become intellectual breeding grounds for economists, CEOs, and government officials. Many of those officials would go on to make policies that favored large corporations, the kind Rockefeller had once built. One of the most quietly brilliant moves, his investments in media. His foundation quietly supported journalism and research institutions that helped set public opinion. He never controlled the message outright, but he didn't need to. Influence was a slow burn, and that influence would be passed down for generations. What's more, many of the post-breakup companies that traced their roots to Standard Oil were donating back to these institutions, creating a loop of power, prestige, and protection that insulated the oil elite from public backlash. But all that institutional goodwill couldn't prevent what was coming next. Another massive oil scandal, this time without Rockefeller at the center. 10 years after Standard Oil was dismantled, oil was once again at the center of America's biggest scandal. Only this time, the corruption reached the White House. It was called the Teapot Dome Scandal. In the early 1920s, the U.S. government had set aside large underground oil reserves for emergency use by the Navy. One of the largest was in Wyoming, known as Teapot Dome. It was supposed to be untouchable, national security stockpiles, but behind closed doors, President Harding's Secretary of the Interior, Albert Fall, quietly leased the reserve to private oil companies without competitive bidding. In exchange, Fall received bribes in the form of cash, cattle, and even home renovations. The companies who got those sweetheart deals? Some of them descendants of Standard Oil. The scandal exploded. Fall was convicted of accepting bribes and became the first U.S. cabinet member to go to prison. Public trust in the government plummeted, and yet, while Fall became the fall guy, the oil companies walked away clean, profitable, powerful. The scandal was a painful reminder that breaking up Standard Oil hadn't broken its reach. Its pieces had simply learned how to move in the shadows, often closer to power than ever before. And what's most ironic, many of those same companies are still shaping the world today, only now they wear a different face and play by updated rules. So when people talk about how John D. Rockefeller lost Standard Oil in 1911, they're missing the point. He didn't lose the game. He changed the rules, and while Standard Oil was technically dismantled, its ghost lived on in the baby companies, in the banks, in the halls of government, and eventually back in boardrooms under new logos. ExxonMobil, Chevron, Amoco, Conoco, Marathon, they were all born from the Standard Oil breakup, and today they're thriving in a world that's as oil-dependent as ever, quietly influencing global energy policy, investing in green tech, and hedging their bets on the future of power. Some have even rebranded to shed the oil-soaked image entirely. It's the kind of long game Rockefeller would have loved. Control the system, let others take the blame, and always, always stay one step ahead. So the next time you fill up your tank, scroll past an ad for eco-friendly energy or read a think piece about corporate monopolies. Remember this, you're not just seeing modern capitalism, you're seeing Rockefeller's shadow, still there, still growing, just wearing a different name.